Thank you very much. When I was back in January, I had never met Eva before, and we were at a PBS advisory board meeting, and we had a dinner together, and it was an exhilarating dinner. We were talking about the last 10, 15 years of research around game-based learning. We were projecting in the future, talking about where things are going, and I was talking about some of the things we're seeing, some of the things we're thinking about, some of the work we're doing with ASU that you got a tease from Sasha on, and how we're synthesizing the last decade and how we're projecting the next decade. And she's like, you have to come talk at this gathering I'm doing in Redondo Beach. And I said, you know, a lot of these ideas are still in formation. We're not really ready to present them. We're really just thinking them through. We're in the fog of multi-stakeholder startup. We're starting to see the vistas out there as the fog clears. And she's said, it's a small little gathering. It's your friends from PBS and Sesame Workshop. And so I guess small is a relative term. But I do consider all of you friends. I do think this is a remarkable community of practice. And as you'll see in my talk, I actually think this community, and I don't know all of you, but I do believe that this community of practice, a lot of what you've heard in the previous talks, could be at the very center of the future of education, and I don't think that's hyperbolic. I'll start to deconstruct that. The basic structure for this, I'm going to go through very briefly. I'm going to introduce the big ideas. I'm not going to read them or talk. I'm just going to let you synthesize them, let them caress your subconscious so they're out there while I'm going through the presentation. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about my background because it is different than most people in this room. I do come from the commercial sector and the nonprofit social impact media sector, not from the research sector. I haven't been a teacher. So I do have a little bit of a different vantage point. I'll talk a little bit about my background. I'll talk a little bit about Eline's mission. Then I'm going to focus on the sector, what we're observing in the broad sector of education, technology, and learning, why we see some amazing pain points that aren't being addressed, and why we think this community of practice could be at the center of addressing those pain points. Robert's then going to come up. He's going to poke, prod, challenge, discuss, and we're going to have hopefully a full discussion with the group. So this is the slide I'm not going to read. I'm going to let you guys read. These are the big ideas, and if I were to synthesize all of these, I believe there is a once-in-a-generation opportunity over the next 5, 6, 7 years that is unprecedented, unlike anything I've seen. I've lived through it, and I'll talk about it in other commercial sectors where there's been radical transformation. I see all the elements here, and it will not be solved by a game or a series of games. It's an entirely different way that I believe we need to look at all the insights that I think you saw emerging in these presentations. So if there's one takeaway, that's a critical one. I also believe that the radical change can happen through stable steps. It doesn't have to happen through immediate radical change. And I think tuning those stable steps is absolutely critical. So very briefly, my background. I started in the commercial film industry in Hollywood and China. China in the 1980s was fascinating because I saw the power of media as an instrument of the state, but it was when China was opening up, I saw the power of the media to change dispositions of a country. It was an astounding experience. I then got recruited into what was then a bankrupt company that a couple young guys bought for $440,000 called Activision. The same two guys run it, $16 billion company. I initially started as the head of creative affairs, then the head of production, then I ran their studios up until about 2000. So I watched it go from like a dozen people to a couple thousand people. But early on in the 90s, which was sort of the second wave of the video game business, there was a small group of companies out there, Electronic Arts, Activision, Microsoft, Sony, actually it was Sega, Nintendo. But that community saw a vision for the entertainment medium. They really did see more space, the CD-ROM coming out, the synergy of writers, designers, animators, game designers, and they envisioned a future, and it's happened. This is now one of the largest entertainment industries, but it was a relatively small community, not unlike this. So I believe large sectors can change with a group of passionate people that have a vision. By 2000, I really wanted to harness the power of games for social impact. There wasn't really a community of practice around that time focused on that. So I ended up starting one of the first double bottom line companies, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on, but it's a company focused on financial returns and social impact, but even at a corporate level, funded by foundations with equity, but also venture capital, strategics. We had 36 different investors, which was very interesting to manage, with different visions of financial return and social impact. Then became chairman of Games for Change, a nonprofit looking to rise the sector of social impact. And it was while I was at the chairman of Games for Change, and I think Allison mentioned a little bit of this gap before, that we started to track hundreds of millions of dollars around the world from foundations, government agencies, nonprofits, universities, all seeking to harness the incredible power of this medium for some form of learning health social impact. What we weren't seeing, and we originally were thinking about coming in as angel investors, was products or services that were coming out of the other end that were actually making impact. There were, as games were becoming services, we were seeing the grants run out and the products being shelved because they had no financial model to sustain it. Just as they were starting to get some powerful research insights, we were seeing significant gaps in technology, significant gaps in terms of strategic marketing, positioning. Are you replacing time or money in the class? Can you compete in the consumer space? Like the rigor of, is there really a need for this? Are you creating something for which there is no need? Lots of interesting challenges, lots of promise. And so we decided to launch E-Line, myself and a colleague named Michael Angst, who had a very successful career. We actually met in the film industry, but he had a very successful career as a private equity investor in education, tech-enabled services, and he thought deeply about sectors and enabling environments in sectors and what can make a sector thrive, how can a sector transform. And so we actually changed from an investment thesis to a publishing thesis because we saw a gap. We saw great projects, we saw great research trials, we saw promising sector dynamics, but we didn't really see a mechanism to close the gap between research and products or services that could make impact at scale in a sustainable way that were research-based. From the very beginning, we set up our company to be about multi-stakeholder partnerships. It's why my hair is gray. These are some of the partners we're working with. We're actually working with quite a few more. And a lot of people look from the commercial sector, when they look at these philanthropic or academic or government organizations, they look at them mostly at the high-risk capital. And make no mistake, the high-risk capital is critical. E-Line couldn't be doing what it's doing without the high-risk capital because we are looking through the fog. We are trying to figure this out. We do have to take risks. We do have to take chances. But what we quickly discovered working with these and other partners is that it's much more than high-risk capital. These organizations have very powerful networks. Many of the people in this room with incredible domain knowledge, incredible passion across multiple sectors. And make no mistake, what we are doing is complex. The solutions are going to be complex and multivariate, multi-determinate. They're going to evolve over time. And these are organizations that understand complex ecosystems. They also have unbelievable distribution. There's other assets that, as somebody looking with a commercial lens, with effective multi-stakeholder partnerships, can greatly accelerate the opportunity set in the space. I throw out this word double bottom line. Sometimes you'll hear blended value, sometimes you'll hear triple bottom line. This is a growing segment. I mean, I've actually been involved in this for over a decade. It's now becoming a little bit more well-known globally in this notion of, can you get risk-adjusted financial returns and make meaningful social impact? So this quadrant, a company like Activision would be in the top left. They are really about return on capital. They are very good at return on capital. They don't really think about the impact, and many, many companies are there. Most nonprofits are in the bottom right. They don't think about revenue. Some of them have an earned revenue stream, but they really think about maximizing social impact. I mean, folks that do everything bad are just really bad. But we're interested in the top right quadrant, which is, broadly speaking, the double bottom line quadrant. But what we've discovered over 10 years of working on projects and companies is that it's very difficult to get stakeholders to shoot for the top right. You'd think, well, why don't you shoot for the top right? Let's go for the most impact and the most money. We have not found that to be possible in our experience. It's not to say it's not possible. What we have found is we break our projects on our slate into projects that are looking for, and this is a sort of venture private equity term, risk-adjusted market-based returns, meaning we are competing in the open market space. But we have filters for the social impact that are rigorous, and over time we want to increase not just the revenue but the social impact. We have other projects that we're doing on mobile phones in Africa and India with the State Department in the Middle East that are really dialing for social impact, but because they are service-based, we want an impact-friendly business model that can be sustained, which doesn't mean an end-user payer necessarily. It could be a third-party payer, it could be any number of hybrid structures, but we are dialing for impact first. We have found it helpful to separate our slate into those things. And I can go into more detail on that. Examples would be at an organizational level. I think I saw some of that, Lori from Sesame Workshop. Sesame Workshop, you know, they turn over, I think, north of $100 million a year, but they're a 501c3. That enables them to have folks like Jim Henson, learning scientists. This stuff is not cheap. They can get the top talent, but they do it within both a legal and a stakeholder alignment structure that's about impact. I'll give you a quick example on a product that actually Robert wrote his PhD on that we picked up called GameStar Mechanic. It's a middle school game-infused curriculum to teach game design. We picked it up when the original developer went out of business. It was funded by the MacArthur Foundation. A classic story, great research results, incredible learning science behind it. Teachers were clamoring and they were going to shelve it because the developer went out of business. MacArthur doesn't know how to understand when a developer is running into trouble. They're not a game publisher. They're a foundation. So we picked it up. We had to throw out the technology, rewrite the technology. We kept the wonderful design, a lot of the learning science, and we tuned it for the school market. But as it relates to this slide, we have a free version, we have a low-cost version, but teachers were telling us it is criminal to teach kids a tool, a creation tool, and there are many creation tools, and then have that tool be at a price point where they can't afford it when they leave the class. That is, talk about learning trajectories being stunted. So we changed our business model. We actually did a lot of research to a $2 per student for a lifetime membership. So once they meet that product, they can use it the rest of their life. It actually increased sales. That's an organic alignment of a business model and social impact, and those are things we strive for. We do consumer products that are designed to fire the imagination, open new worlds, but that youth will play in their discretionary time. And we do learning projects that are designed to replace time or money in the classroom. I'm not going to talk about our gateway products. We do have a suite of NSF research brain game projects that are very interesting. We're doing cultural storytelling with Alaska Native tribes to keep indigenous languages and cultures alive through high-end commercial games. We're doing civic engagement in the Middle East. Not going to talk about those, going to talk about education. So in the commercial industry, when you look at how the internet and technology has transformed sectors, you could almost draw a map of sectors and how the internet and technology has swept through them. Some of the first sectors to change were music, film, games, the media sectors. I mean, we remember Napster. We remember albums becoming unbundled into single songs, like massive change in the sector, massive dislocation. You could disintermediate. It used to be that you had to go through retailers, but now you could go directly to consumers. Huge, huge change. Content changed, platforms changed, communities were connected, communities could share what they were buying. That changed media. The interesting thing is, I actually believe all of those are happening in education, and they're coming to a critical point right now. Curriculum is becoming unbundled. The textbooks we know are going away. That's astounding. How will curriculum be rebundled is a massive question. I don't believe it's going to be a single magical algorithm, and it's not going to be an app store. So you're going to find, it'll have elements of those. You're going to, this middle ground of how curriculum will come rebundled with a research basis that is adaptable, extendable. There's a magic middle way there that I believe this community is getting closer to. It will be tech mediated. It will be blended in some form. It's going to happen. At the same time, all the assessments are changing. You know, looking in general for more higher order skills, process, looking for transfer, all the things you heard about, that's astounding. You know, a massive shift. So not only is the curriculum becoming unbundled, all the assessments are changing. Unbelievable shift in dynamics. We can disintermediate. A product like GameStar, again, we didn't come from the education field. Everybody said you'll never get a middle school game design curriculum to teach systems thinking into schools. With no sales or marketing people, we're in about over 7,000, 8,000 schools and after-school programs. We don't have one salesperson. It's entirely focused on teacher discoverability, reducing friction for teacher adoption, early efficacy in the classroom for teachers and students, and then teachers recommending it to other teachers because there is no other better recommendation. We actually learned a lot from BrainPop and what they've done in the supplemental space, which I think is phenomenal. But that means we can do innovation from the bottom up. Right now, because we've had some success with that and some other products, we're now getting requests for top-down district sales. And I just presented at the World Economic Forum at Davos, and I have countrywide opportunities. The challenge there is our teachers love our products in general because they selected it. They choose to lean forward and use it, and the ones that chose not to aren't using it. Once we ask teachers to use a product that they did not ask for, it's a different rhythm where you need a lot more support, a lot more ecosystem support, a lot more professional development. So we're learning this balance between bottoms up and top down to get to scale, and we're in that transition. Lots of new platforms. It's a tough environment out there. You have iOS devices, you have Android devices, you have computer labs, you have legacy labs, you have laptop carts. This is what we lived in the game industry. We had Sony, Nintendo, Sega, 3DO, all these different platforms. To be successful is not easy. You have to support a continually evolving, changing, fragmented technology environment. You just have to. We do believe in games as a service, not games as a product. The ecosystem is constantly changing. We are getting all this data. This can't be static. This is a complex ecosystem. We actually need complex systems that are easy to use and continually updated and adapted. And I don't know if you read Tom Friedman's editorial in the New York Times where he interviewed the chief hiring officer at Google, who just reinforced the type of dispositions and skills they're looking for. And you hear that, I can tell you at the World Economic Forum, meeting with these world leaders, you hear that across the board in terms of the type of dispositions and literacies that youth and young adults will need in a world where they're going to change jobs 12 times, the jobs may not exist yet, all the things you read about in the newspaper really are true. And it's not just college and career readiness, it's life readiness. To navigate life in this day, you are mediating complex systems, you are going through technology mediation. So the world really is pretty rapidly changing. This is, when you start to see, with the shifting dynamics, some of the incredible pain points that are emerging. Teachers don't have time to rebundle and figure out their whole curriculum. They're going a million miles an hour. It's one of the biggest problems, I believe, in K-12 is teachers just don't have enough time to navigate all of these changes. A lot of them weren't trained to work in inquiry-based learning or blended learning. It's all new to them. And it's not necessarily their comfort zone, and they're not necessarily connected to mentors or have the time to work with mentors. I have a kid in middle school and a kid in high school, and it's just absurd. The tests that are coming in are so misaligned with the curriculum, and now it's part of their grade. The parents are up in arms. We just had a big community meeting. The emerging curriculums are not aligned with the assessments. Talk about a pain point that's out there that has parents up in arms, and the schools are stressed, and the teachers are stressed. And then you have the employers out there saying, you're not fostering the dispositions and literacies we need. So when you see a sector that is going through that much pain, there is incredible opportunity. When I look at the full sort of picture of this, a lot of it seems to come back to the need for effective inquiry-based learning that is technology-mediated but uses multiple modalities, technology and not, that aligns with an ecosystem that is continually optimized. And what's interesting is that's what this community, if you just go through all of the 5-minute talks, they were basically feeling around how can you make inquiry-based learning with game-infused frameworks effective for ecosystems that are out there that are continually optimized for the learner, for the teacher, for the parents, for the administrators. I believe we have a general approach that's now backed by a growing body of research, a decade old, that's saying, instead of being the marginalized supplemental game, these bounded games that you play and finish have a role, absolutely have a role in education, but they are the tail, not the dog. And as they get better, they actually get harder to implement because they're deeper and more complex, and all this other pain is over there. So even if there's an organic alignment of good learning science and good game mechanics, and we are getting better at that as a community, that's necessary but not sufficient, because it still could be marginalized even if it's a good product. And I can tell you there's a lot out there because they don't fit into what is now the dog of how learning is working. So the big proposition that I'm proposing out there that I think got Eva excited is, what would it take for us to be the dog and not the tail? Because I believe it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity for that to happen. When I talk about lack of supply, I believe this is a supply problem. I believe most of our products are broken. The ecosystem isn't broken. The ecosystem is the ecosystem. It's changing. It's evolving. We can do policy work. We should do policy work. But the ecosystem is the ecosystem. Our products are broken if they're not tuned to work within what the ecosystem is. And to quote Steve Jobs quoting Wayne Gretzky, if we're not building products for where the hockey puck is going, then we are the problem, not the ecosystem. And we have to be more rigorous, not just on the learning science and the game design, but are we replacing time or money in the classroom? Are we tuning our products and services to actually be a must-have, not a nice-to-have? And I can tell you, I've been approached by heads of state, ministers of education, district heads who they're not scared about inquiry-based learning or game-based learning. They want these dispositions. They want these literacies. They can't find the solutions that can work for their needs. So I do believe, and of course it's not everybody, but I can tell you entire countries have gone one-to-one with these lower-cost tablets and laptops. You know, that's been a huge enabling influence. They've done huge infrastructure to get bandwidth. That's inevitably going to get better and better. They are also interested in these assessments, and they're struggling to find comprehensive solutions. They don't want a one-off game or a small one-off products. But we can only get to that radical step through very thoughtful, stable steps, both as individual researchers, companies, but also as a community of practice. So again, if there's a big idea takeaway, the first set of presentations really enforced why games are so strong. I think this room seems pretty well versed in what makes kind of games unique. They are lean forward, they're participatory, you can step into different roles, take on challenges, solve problems, individually, collaborative, you fail safely, you get copious feedback. It's why you get billions and billions of hours of lean forward engagement. A lot of those core principles do align with learning. That's been around for the last 10 years. I think we need to be a little bit more rigorous on separating the affordances and limitations of games as a product. And an adventure game lets you step into a role, go into a problem space, solve problems. It's a wonderful mechanism. Should that sit before a lecture? Should that sit after a lecture? Should that be integrated into a certain inquiry-based trajectory? Is there the embedded assessment in the game? Does it sit with a larger assessment rubric outside the game? Very different from a strategy game or a simulation or an action game. We actually have a lot of good research on this, understanding the affordances and limitations. Let's look at that research. Then let's step back and say, that's just one modality. There's lots of other modalities that are not technology-based, some are, some aren't, that are not game-based, that can be sequenced in a research way, and it's not always the same way, depending on the subject, the grade, the learner, and crucially can be adapted and extended by the teacher or by other people in the community so that these aren't static systems. They are living systems. And again, look at the commercial game industry. Look at what is possibly the most successful game of all time. If you look at profitability, Minecraft, which was referenced earlier. I also have kids obsessed with it. But first of all, talk about disintermediation. Minecraft couldn't have existed. When I was running the studios at Activision, if you wanted to get a game into Walmart or Best Buy, you had to go through us or EA or Microsoft. But Notch could develop this game for himself, disintermediate it, go right to the users, create a phenomenon, and then made it extensible so people could mod, extend it. It became a community of practice. The YouTube videos, I was at Minecon with my kids recently, the Minecraft convention, which is surreal. And we were actually there with a project with Google teaching quantum mechanics. You can Google it, QCraft, to 12-year-olds, which was amazing. We've had about 1 million downloads of kids learning quantum mechanics in Minecraft. But the YouTube video gamecasters, and any Minecraft parent knows who these are, the YouTube video gamecasters are getting about 100 million views on their videos. They had to be escorted by the police because they were being mobbed by 12-year-olds. I mean, Notch couldn't even go near. I mean, we're talking about a passionate affinity space unlike anything that you've ever seen. We as a sector can learn a lot from that. So ultimately, our belief, and this is work that Sasha teased, because we're doing this in partnership with ASU and the Center of Games and Impact, and I'll spend a little bit more time on some of the slides he put up very quickly because he had less time than I did. We do believe that ultimately radical change through stable steps starts with a powerful vision. And we really believe this notion of this is John Seely Brown's work that we've been very influenced by, cultivating dispositions mentoring and nurturing literacies in a context that covers domain content, we really believe is a lot of the secret sauce of what we need to do. We do believe it can and should be research and evidence-based, but also informed by market needs, replacing time or money in the classroom. We do believe it needs to align with an ecosystem, so it has to be flexible and adaptable, but with a real research-based spine that can be adapted, extended. We do believe that ultimately it should be optimized over time. The whole idea of big data, I mean, one thing that actually, I was on the train with Karina from BrainPop, and she reinforced something that we hear a lot from teachers. They don't want a ton of data. They want just enough data. They want enough data to help them with their students, whether they're helping their students along or having to provide a grade. The students need enough data. I mean, games don't overwhelm you. They're good at providing the right amount of data to accomplish the trajectories. So we gotta be able to constantly be looking at the data. All of these things add up to what we believe are the kind of pillars of the framework that will provide a solution. Ultimately, I believe we as a community need all the dispositions and literacies that we want to foster in our kids if we're going to be successful, because this is hard. So these are some of them. So Sasha had this slide up earlier. I'll spend a little bit more time on it. And it's not like these are the only dispositions, but these are the ones that we keep coming back to. And interestingly, when we look at something like being an engaged and a purposeful learner, which we see as kind of a meta disposition, we want that in our kids, in our employees, in our leaders, in our partners. To be engaged and purposeful is a powerful thing. I mean, I would even add the word curious there. To be curious, engaged, and purposeful. We believe that's a disposition that can be cultivated and in fact can be measured, and we'll talk about that. We also believe you need to be a disciplined investigator. You need to be able to lean forward and through quantitative, qualitative analysis, scientific method, and this is at a personal level, a community level, and at a global level. You need to be able to solve problems, be a creative problem solver. Not every solution has to be innovative. Some need to be, but not all of them. You just need to be able to effectively understand the data, solve problems. And an effective collaborator is really a superset for a lot of the social emotional stuff, which we believe in passionately. You need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to listen. You need to be able to have, you can't collaborate unless you have empathy. Like when I look at the persuasive writing in the Common Core, it's very mechanical, evidence and claims, absolutely critical, necessary, but I would say not sufficient. Who are you trying to convince? Why are you trying? What's their disposition? That's empathy. That's communication. That's listening. These are complex systems. They're not crazy complex. In some ways, they're intuitive. We believe you need to look at that holistically. And ultimately, the rigorous optimizer is recognizing that this stuff is hard. Many things in life are hard. It's the resiliency, it's the grit, but it's also the joy of seeing progress. Getting feedback that I'm on a journey to solving this challenge or that challenge. We believe that these actually transcend grade and subject, and in fact need to be reinforced across grade and subjects. With a third of kids dropping out, with kids going into college and many dropping out, this notion of relevancy, if you reinforce critical dispositions and literacies across grades and subjects, we believe it'll be more likely that school remains relevant, especially if you're getting the feedback that it's not only happening in school, it's happening outside of school, and we can talk about how we're working on that. So we're developing this platform, and again, we hadn't really meant on sort of bringing it out publicly because we're still figuring it out. And it's actually a lot of things coming together, including existing products that are in the market that we're adapting into the platform. But broadly speaking, I mentioned dispositions. We also see critical skill. We sort of use skills and literacies interchangeably. And those are literacies, whether it's scientific inquiry or digital fabrication, new literacies that are coming along, that actually also often will cross subject and can be reinforced over grades. But it's critical that that be done in a context where teachers still need to cover the content that they need to cover, whether it's at a elementary school level, middle school, high school, or continuing ed. Because we can't just push this over there and say, well, forget the stuff you have to do. We have to know what they need to do and find a way to incorporate it into the dispositions and literacies. And by the way, it's hard, but it's not that hard. A lot of this stuff does naturally align. We think a lot about the learning trajectories. And so we, bounded games, but we also think about video, animation, like the presentation on medical animation, like that's an incredibly powerful modality. And it's not a game, it doesn't need to be a game, but a game might sit before it, after it, or it might sit within a game-infused construct, and lots of things that have smart tools. We think about smart tools a lot. In fact, we think about tools that people use in the real world and say, how do we embed that tool in the curriculum so when the child meets that tool in the real world, they can use it, or they can use it in a virtual safe environment and then use it in the real world. So things like smart tools that get reinforced across curriculum and across grades, and by the way, that's good business because we're covering more material, we're covering more content. District superintendents, curriculum buyers need coverage. They want that reinforcement. Another alignment of business model and social impact. I've talked a lot about, but you can't stress enough, these have to be not just adopted, but adapted locally. We're working on a number of projects that are teacher created. We're working on a social studies curriculum that was created by 2 teachers in Texas where they essentially threw out the textbook, created a paper-based version of Civilization, and over 6 years they optimized that as a construct where kids can essentially take on roles in history, compete in history. And interestingly, in Texas they get compensated on the test scores. Although teachers and administrators were initially skeptical, the test scores kept going up. So now they have teachers all over the place saying, can I get that? This is a teacher innovation. We're working with Joel Levin, who does Minecraft EDU, another teacher innovation. So there's a wealth of knowledge if we can empower teachers to extend these projects. All of the research-based games that are bounded games that may have had an insight that are sitting on a shelf, maybe they can live within a context and a trajectory and come off the shelf. We think that can be very, very powerful. And we think a lot about the business models. How do we create, some of these stakeholders want it to be philanthropic. Well, that's a model. Some of them need revenue because they want to keep optimizing it. Well, that's a model. We got to crack these things in sort of a living way. So we do think a lot about the partnership structure. And by the way, the game industry has clues there. Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, they do first-party platforms. They make the hardware, they make big games like Halo and Mario, but they also nurture a third-party ecosystem. So companies like Activision that don't have hardware can make games for their platform. And it's not an app store. You have to qualify. It has to fit their filters for quality. They train you, and you get an incredible distribution platform. There are analogs in education for first-party, third-party, ecosystem business models that can empower lots of different folks, especially researchers. So, these are some of the evolving interfaces, mock-ups. One of the things we love about the Eline ASU partnership is we spent a year negotiating a deal, and we're about to close it, and it's very complex in terms of a public-private partnership where we thought through the IP, we thought through the revenue, we thought through the roles and responsibilities, we thought through the public charter of the university, we thought through our investor base, and say, how can we get in the same shoes so that we are operating in a way that we're just trying to make the most impact at scale. It's taken over a year to think that through, to develop the trust, but we think we're there. And the fact is, we need that research. We need the agile research. We need to be on top when we talk about evidence-based. What does that really mean? How are we assessing whether we are? How can we stay on the cutting edge of research? Do agile development, but build it on a hardened technology and publishing infrastructure that really can scale, because it's a tough market out there. And God knows there's a lot of really innovative products that were built on weak technology, weak infrastructure, and went away as a result. So in terms of assessment, which I think will be a great conversation with Robert, it's a fascinating question as to, how do we get the observable indicators, which is a phrase I got from Robert, which I really like, and actionable feedback so that we help the learner on their journey. To me, that's the most critical thing, that the learner is on a journey and that they don't look at assessments as a bad thing, much like in games. They look at it as, give me more. I want to go on this journey. But also, how do we be cognizant that the teachers, when I sit in my kids' teacher-parent meetings, every year it's the same thing. They grade on quizzes and tests, reports that are handed in, classroom participation, and in New Jersey, standardized tests, kind of 25, 25, 25, 25. So that's what teachers are doing. How do we get them to more or less do that, but within this theory of change, with these dispositions, with these literacies, in an inquiry-based learning? It's a fascinating question, and we're teasing out that question. Even totally out-of-the-box things, like my kids and all their friends are on QuizUp. I don't know if you know the QuizUp app. It's a really fun social quiz app. I recently talked to the group. They're in Reykjavik, Iceland, of all things. And they said some of their most popular categories are the hardcore educational categories. And they're fascinated by that. So it's not like even quizzes need to be dreary or dull. They can be engaging. But that's just one small example. And there are going to be these benchmark standards. And I believe over time, they are moving in a direction of looking at the more process and higher order skills. But it's hard. I actually think quality products and services will help the dialogue around these benchmarks because people will see it. And if we're figuring it out just at a service level, there might be clues that might be beneficial, we as a community, for these larger high-stakes discussions. Our first rollout is a middle school rollout where we're actually taking 5 or 6 products, GameStar Mechanic, Minecraft EDU, Atlantis Remix, the Quest Atlantis Suite, the teacher professional development Sasha talked about, the social studies. So some of these are already in schools. We're probably in over 10,000 schools with these products already. So this is not theoretical. And we believe if we can take these different approaches integrated into what we're calling the Thrive platform with the dispositions and literacies, it will be easier to fold other modalities in. And we're now getting a deep pipeline of people approaching us, more than we can actually handle right now, saying, hey, what if this sat here within this learning trajectory? And it's a fascinating process to deconstruct that. So I'm going to end on this slide, which I just love. This is actually a project we're working on, digital fabrication, teaching kids how to go from the physical world to the digital world, a project with MIT. But ultimately, if we want to help youth thrive in a very complex, very rapidly changing, digitally infused, globally connected world, we ourselves, this community, are going to need to be engaged and purposeful learners, disciplined investigators, creative problem solvers, effective collaborators, and very rigorous optimizers. So thank you.